أعزائي المشاهدين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. نرحب بكم مرة أخرى في حلقة جديدة من برنامج الحد الأدنى. لا شك أن قضية النزاعات في العالم تحتل مكانا بارزا في اهتمامات الساسة والمحللين والمراقبين، لأنها تمس جوهر حيوات الناس في الاستقرار والسلام والسلم الدولي والإقليمي. وفي ظل الأبعاد المضطربة لأحوال العالم وقضايا السياسة الدولية التي تمر بمرحلة دقيقة في العالم، وكذلك القضايا الإقليمية الراهنة والتي يعتبر السودان حلقة وصل بينها جميعا نسبة لموقعه الاستراتيجي. لذا فإن قضية فض النزاعات، قضية السلم والاستقرار والتفاوض، أحد أهم الأدوات التي يستخدمها المجتمع الدولي من أجل تعزيز السلم والاستقرار في العالم. بهذه المقدمة والتوطئة البسيطة يسعدنا أن نستضيف في هذه الحلقة خبير المفاوضات العالمي وأستاذ العلاقات الدولية وأستاذ فض النزاعات في العالم، الدكتور جوزيف باسكال، وهو أستاذ فض النزاعات في جامعة كولومبيا في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. وهو أيضا خبير المفاوضات العالمي في عدد، وخبير ومستشار لدى الأمم المتحدة والاتحاد الافريقي وعدد من المنظمات الإقليمية والدولية. نسعد أن نستضيفه في زيارته الخاصة إلى السودان هذه الأيام. دكتور جوزيف باسكال, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. I think would like to start with your new book, The International Mediator, a Handbook. I think the issue of conflict in the world right now is a very prominent. It is conflict is a concern for everybody around the world, because peace and stability is very essential for the progress, for the prosperity and stability of the world. What about the book, the content, and what the question actually you would like to address in this book?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for inviting me for talking about this book and about how we can resolve conflict and how we can discuss that. Now, you mentioned conflict, and actually if you take a look at the conflicts of the world, it's not that conflicts have become more complex. They have always been complex. Whether you had the classic conflict, the interstate environments, or the internal civil wars, they have always been complex. But what increased complexity is the actors. There is a multitude of actors. There's more actors in the political fray. There's many more actors re-envisioning their political agenda. And so they use the means of technology. They use the means of the media. They use the means of maybe disgruntled, marginalized populations to then take up that political fray. And so when the Cold War ended and the power dynamics shifted in the world, that's where we had also more nations, more state, but also non-state armed actors who claimed to have a political say in how the state functions. And if you then contrast that to a range of current criteria, such as weak states, fragile states, where the state capacity is limited to the capital city, but look at many states in the African continent, how much power projection do they have between the capital city and the borders? Almost none. So state collapse is certainly one, or weak states is certainly one critical dimension that we have on the African continent that does fuel conflict in a violent scale. The other one is legitimacy. Who are these actors that claim power, that claim political agendas, that also even claim mediation, which is then the other element that we can talk about, on how you have an internal conflict that is being handled by internal actors through negotiation, mediation. And in Africa, there's a long tradition of doing that internally. But on the supply side, on the external side, you have also more actors that claim that they can bring solutions to the parties' problems. We'll touch about Syria in a few minutes, but that's what the problem in Syria is. Now, the book tries not to rediscover mediation. It is also not reinventing mediation. Mediation has been there for a long time. But it tries to bring about maybe a new awareness on how mediation can be used in a multiplicities of worlds and multiplicities of powers. So how the mediator is supposed to handle the different actors, the different political agendas in a new world. We are moving away from interstate wars. We have internecine wars, tribal warfare, all the way to the very small units. Mediators back in the days, they were used to sit at the tables in rooms like these here and negotiate political agendas with recognized parties. But now, look at Mali, look at CAR, look at South Sudan, look at Yemen, Syria. You have many more actors that claim to also have a say in the future outcome of the country. So the mediator goes not just at the big tables to discuss, he also goes all the way down. And this is what the book is about, is how to deploy a conflict resolution strategy that works for the parties, that takes into account the cultural context of the parties, that takes into account the awareness around the ideas that the parties have on how to resolve their conflicts, and to say that the mediator has to be, again, a good listener to these concerns and these grievances and be able to table them. So the book brings back this kind of awareness that a mediator is there to provide the parties with assistance in dealing with their conflict. So we focus here on three things in the book. And I posit that in the very first beginning. A mediator has to have good management skills. He has to manage not just the parties, but also other mediators. We see, for example, that parties nowadays, if they are concerned about their conflict, and if they feel that an outsider may help their agenda, they do what they call forum shopping. They go around the world and they posit their claims with maybe a big country, a big state with lots of power, the US maybe, or they go to Russia, or they go to another client that helps them. So what kind of mediation management skills do we bring? The book covers this. You also have to have good people skills. In mediation training, you talk a lot about active listening skills that have to be deployed. So the mediator listens carefully to these concerns. But actually, if you have common sense, if you understand people's grievances, if you understand how people deploy frustration and hate and anger onto the other to gain something, if you understand that, then you have these people skills. At the same time, and finally, you have to have good luck. No intervention works if you don't try it out. And so in this book, I cover a less of an academic approach, but more of a how-to, with a step-by-step approach to mediation, from the pre-talks, how we enter mediation, to understanding what makes mediation work, when is the ripe moment for intervention, all the way to how do we use media to convey the message to the population. And it covers at the end of the book a very comprehensive case study on the Sudan mediations that took place over a time stretch of maybe 20, 25 years, 30 years of mediations in all areas, where you can see that sometimes your strategy may work out, but at the same time, it depends on good luck.
Dr. Pascal, I mean, it sounds very interesting actually for everybody to read this book, but unfortunately still available in English version. Do you have any ambition to have it translated in Arabic to be available for the Arabic leaders, and also as a tool and awareness also for the people in the Arabic world?
That's correct. One thing that I found we don't have enough in the field, and especially from an African perspective, is that we have enough voices from African mediators that you can read outside of Africa about mediation experiences. We speak a lot about indigenous ways to resolve conflict, the traditions of West Africa.
That, yeah.
But there's not so much happening in the world of research and academia that tells us these lessons learned. There's only a few books. So I thought, coming myself from Western Africa, from Cape Verde, that I should be part of this new discourse and bring out these stories. So it has been first published in English because most of my audiences were in the English-speaking world. This year we have 3 new translations coming out: French, Portuguese, and Russian.
Great.
And we just concluded discussions with the University of Khartoum Press that they will translate this book into Arabic. And Khartoum Press will also have the official contract to also print the book in English here. So that means audiences here can access this for a relatively good price, but the Arabic version will also be able then to be disseminated throughout the Arabic world, either in Africa or in the Gulf countries.
Can I ask you a personal question? I mean, you are originally from West Africa, from Cape Verde. You were schooled and graduated from, and right now you are teaching in Columbia University. What motivated you, you know, to specialize in this field, in conflict resolution? That because you think that African continent need real help, knowledge, and tools to resolve its own problem over there, or just an academic personal choice?
I came very late to understanding what I do. And I think it was more fueled by the fact that I saw around me, growing up in my African cultures, real suffering, real grievances. At some point I felt privileged. I was able to travel, I was able to learn, I was able to go abroad to either do my studies or to work. But I felt that just to do it for myself is not sufficient. The tools I gain, the insights I have, the knowledge, I want to give it back to the people that I can see on a daily basis have these ideas, but they don't have the means or they can't communicate. So I tried to give them that voice as well. So it was rather late that I discovered that I want to be a servant to this maybe humanity, you know, trying to make things better. I don't claim to know the answers.
Noble cause.
Thank you. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I try my best that I can to get involved and help. And typically the feedback is very strong and very positive. And I work in Africa on conflicts, but I also work in Central America on conflicts. I deploy to the Middle East or to the Far East and provide support there as much as I can. So I think it came rather late, but based on the understanding that I have these knowledge about what's happening around me, but I also have the tools to help.
This is great. I mean, I would like to talk briefly about the conflict in general and the armed conflict in particular, especially in Africa. I don't know whether the armed conflict in Africa is increasing, decreasing, having in mind different factors. Urbanization process is taking, a real momentum in Africa, education, welfare state. But at the same time, you said before that the weakness of the state and the actors and the political ambition and the ethnic tension and the ecological change and different multifaceted, dimension and factors interplay together. Mm-hmm. Do you think this armed conflict in Africa increasing or decreasing, and what are the root causes so far?
Research tells us that we actually live in a good period. Interstate conflicts have decreased. In that sense, mediation as a tool of international conflict resolution has been very successful, using diplomacy, using NGOs, civil society, and a whole array of actors to work on that. So if you look now at maybe active conflicts in Africa on the political level, you maybe look at 6 major conflicts, but they are major, and they are disrupting the peace and security fray throughout the Sahel, but also throughout the Great Lakes region. The issues remain. You still have at the root cause, at the center of these root causes, a weak state capacity to respond to these conflicts. Inability to respond, inability to mitigate, inability to actually properly prevent.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. It requires state capacity on many different levels, but it also requires an engaged citizenry. The question is how much do citizens know what they can do and what they cannot do? So here we have conflicts at different levels. But for political conflicts to work or to be mitigated, we have to look back at the state capacity. Its ability to work as a peace infrastructure, its ability to manage grievances, its ability to offer everybody a job, its ability to say to a young person, you can have your own startup, I will give you a credit or a loan. It's very difficult for African countries to do that at this point in time. And you only have a few examples. So I would say the weak ability of a state to do so to provide for its citizens is one root of cause of concern. But the other one is also the mass proliferation of weapons.
Yeah.
Small arms and light weapons, you find them across the board throughout Africa. When Libya collapsed, the major influx of these weapons enabled conflict within the Sahel. And those two elements are really, really critical. So you have maybe a decrease in interstate violence, interstate armed conflict, but you have an increase in local violence. You can see now today we had these news about Al-Shabaab attacking places in Nairobi. And we will see that more often about violent transnational extremist groups claiming a specific part of their agenda and ideology in other places.
But without interruption, I mean, there is a legitimate question here. It's very pressing, actually. When you talk about the weakness of the state in Africa as one of the reasons that we might have this conflict, you know, the collapse of the central authority, the central government system, like we had seen in Libya, when Gaddafi, you know, system collapses, then the chaotic situation took over and all that. So it's not a hypothetical question, but do you think preserving the central government and central authority, regardless of its behavior, might be more useful to still manage the situation and prove it forward, rather than to have a chaotic situation in most of the African countries? We have seen that in different countries.
That's a very good question. I'm not sure I have the answer to that. I think it goes back to understanding what do citizens want. How are citizens involved in democracy, whatever that means. It doesn't have to be democracy a la Western style. It's just that how do citizens...
Liberal democracy.
How do citizens get involved? You can have democracy or autocracy, but if the citizens do not feel involved in the political dispensation of their country, the grievances will rise. And you have the situation now in Europe, in other states as well, where you have a rise in populism, and even those democratic states don't have an answer to that. So as long as a state as you can manage to answer to the needs to your people, I think you're on a good track. But you also have to engage citizens. You know, citizens become part of your security as well. You know, they are there, they are the eyes and the ears of the government as well. But they have to feel that they are part of the system. If you just keep them aside, or if you just have it focusing on an elite, then the people get disgruntled and they get frustrated, and then they take onto the streets. And then you have to ask yourself as a government, am I on the right track? So I think it's very contextual. I don't think that there is a answer to either yes or no, but it depends on context, it depends on setting, and it depends on what do the people want out of their nation-state idea.
That's correct. I would like just to ask about the mediation as an effective tool for conflict resolution. What are the main elements that make any negotiation process can success or failed? This contextual definitely, but what are the main elements that for negotiation to be successful as an effective tool for conflict resolution?
So I think there are two things that we have to focus on, and the book speaks about that.
Yeah.
In the book, we look at what do the parties want, and that's very important. In many cases, situations, you have mediators with a mandate coming from an international organization, but the parties may want something very different. So what does a mediator do? So what do the parties want is very important, but also what's my mandate as a mediator? And that understanding of what the parties want and my mandate then decides what role you take as a mediator and what process you will engage in. So you may have a situation such in Syria where Annan and his 6-point plan basically faltered because Annan was unable to have an enforcement component to his mediation efforts. Right? In other situations, you may want to have a dialogue. You don't want to be too forceful. You want to make sure that you include everybody at the table. But it goes again to understanding what do the parties want? What do they really want and asking for? And what's my mandate? If you have a ceasefire mandate and your task is within 3 weeks to arrange a ceasefire agreement, but there's no peace to keep in the first place because the parties are not ready yet to keep the peace, then you have a problem. What is your role? And what is the process that you're going to take into account? So these two considerations are critical. It then decides upon whether you are operating on your own with local forces, local key stakeholders only, or if you have to apply for the big P5 and ask them for their help. How many external supporters do you bring in? That was another key dimension in Syria, where all of a sudden too many people from the outside came into Syria and tried to resolve or
we're going to talk about Syria in details, definitely, but I would like to talk about the role of media. We are in the, the social media, social, civil society and social media effect in the world, and the fake news. I mean, how can media would be a medium and a channel to create conducive atmosphere for conflict settlement, or can be also a tool to inflame the conflict, because at the edge of the fake news, everything is, gray. You cannot decide whether it is the truth or it is false.
Mm-hmm. You see, we live now in a culture of technology. This is the age of technology. We claim that media allows us to bridge to the other side, to make the world smaller. But media also has enabled negative forces to use the same terrain.
Yes.
So all of a sudden the world becomes very, very small. For a long time, mediators understood that public opinion is important, but they've not understood how to use media as a tool for strategy to bring parties together around a certain topic. And so it's only recently that media has become much more prominent at the highest level, to be able to reach out to other people, to give them the tools to engage in the debate, to ensure that if at the track one, the highest level, we speak about the peace process, that people are informed about what is going on. Why is this mediator in my country? And use the media to do that. And then it requires two different approaches. On the one side, as a mediator, you use it as a tool to reach out, to include, to raise awareness, to appreciate other concerns and grievances. But at the same time, it's also an educational tool. You have to teach journalists on how to maybe focus more on peace, on good stories, than just conflict. Media nowadays, as you know, works very well when there are bad news. And in the media world, we say bad news is good news.
That's true.
But in mediation, you have to see that good news is good news.
But people think that the social media is unmanageable.
Yeah, the question is, do we have to manage social media? What would be the use of managing social media? Sometimes we have this debate in teachers. Do we allow our students to have cell phones or laptops in class? And it's a belief debate. Some believe that, well, if they bring their laptops, they're distracted. They may be on Facebook, they may be on other things. I say, let them bring the laptops, let them bring their smartphones, because this is what their age is. So then it's then about me to change how I approach a certain topic. And they can then ask, well, if you have access to media and internet, take a look at this. Can you find out about that? Can you do more research? So I think it's more embracing it and say, what are the different strategies, mechanisms, and processes I can use using media? Nowadays, we have a lot of discussion around how media helps us as mediators to maybe do online mediation, to use it as a tool for shuttle diplomacy. And many NGOs work with that.
So you're using modern technology
Absolutely.
to help you in the mediation process.
So in commercial mediation, it's already there.
Yeah, they're already there.
In political mediation is a bit more difficult because of the sensitivity of issues, and that's a given. But we can use media as a tool for us to prevent conflict, to look where hate speech may happen, where fake news may come up, and then we can target our efforts towards exactly that.
To contain hatred. Also.
Yes.
I mean, we really thank you very much for your ideas and discussion in the first part. We take a break then come back.
Thank you very much.
أعزائي المشاهدين فاصل قصير ثم نعود فابقوا معنا. أعزائي المشاهدين مرحبا بكم مرة أخرى في برنامج الحد الأدنى، ونحن نواصل الحوار مع دكتور جوزيف باسكال، أستاذ فض النزاعات في جامعة كولومبيا في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، والخبير الدولي في فض النزاعات والمفاوضات. تحدث الدكتور باسكال في الجزء الأول من هذا الحوار حول قضية فض النزاعات وكذلك وسائل التسوية السلمية عبر التفاوض وما إلى ذلك. وفي الجزء الثاني من هذا الحوار نواصل النقاش حول قضايا أخرى بأخذ بعض الأمثلة حول النزاعات في العالم. Welcome back, Dr. Pascal, once again. And I would like to start our discussion at the second part about the peacekeeping. There are a lot of debate right now at the international forum between states regarding the peacekeeping missions in the world. One part think that peacekeeping, is wasting of money, doing nothing, couldn't achieve its goal and objective, and it might prolong conflicts. The others, on the second hand, they think that it is important to provide protection for civilians and to control the conflict in a way for the second phase of peace building. The first part represented by the US, right now Congress and President Trump doesn't allocate any more fund, but Europe is still very supportive with the UN for that peacekeeping mission. In your perspective and expertise, do you think peacekeeping mission was effective enough to provide protection for civilians and to achieve its ultimate goal regarding their missions?
Mm-hmm. You see, with peacekeeping is similar to the discussion about the glass half empty or the glass half full.
Yeah.
If we didn't have the peacekeeping mission, it would be definitely worse. If you do have the peacekeeping mission, then the question is, what did the peacekeeping mission actually achieve? I think peacekeeping missions do a lot more and a lot better than we usually perceive. Peacekeeping missions do a lot more than what we see. And it's easy to target peacekeeping missions because it's visible. Peace building is much more salient and pervasive. You don't always see it right away. But peacekeeping is always a big activity that involves lots of attention. The US has moved to either decrease or diminish its involvement in peacekeeping is not new. It has been there for many years, for a long time, and for good reasons. You can find much data about how peacekeeping operations are either mismanaged or they are not able to carry out their activities. It's difficult for peacekeeping missions. Your mandate is sometimes very limited. Your mandate allows you to carry out what the state should be doing, and it means as a peacekeeper you do much more than you started out with. So it's not just protecting the civilians. That I think peacekeeping operations do pretty well. But all of a sudden they do have to do other things that the state didn't do. If you look at MONUSCO or even the UNMISS mission, their mandate is to extend state capacity, state governance. We spoke about the weak state. So being able to provide security and stability. Research has shown that peacekeeping operations are very valuable contributions to regional but also global stability and security. But you may have to ask the question is, on what mandate did these peacekeeping operations actually deploy? And back in the days, these operations were largely military. But throughout the past, we've seen, especially on the African continent, the Africans were
civilian
very
component.
Strong, much more civilians involved, which I think is a good direction. So now in the peacekeeping operation, you have military components, civilian components, and police components. And in that trifold of activities, you try to see that and feel that peacekeeping missions are trying to operate much more closely to the target audience that they have. So I think we will still see peacekeeping operations continuing.
But without interruption, Dr. Pascal, the problem that some people in Africa in general see that if this, the cost of peacekeeping is almost very high.
Very high, absolutely.
They think that if this money has been directed and used to address the root causes of the conflict rather than to spend it over the peacekeeping operation missions might be far better. I don't know. It is
Yeah, I see your concern and I understand where some perspective may say that, but I think they operate on the basis of wrong facts or not enough data. Because if you didn't have the peacekeeping operation in place, the same pundits who brought the conflict in the first place would continue with the conflict. So I'm not quite sure, and you can see other examples, counterfactuals, as we call them in research, that show you otherwise. That even if you didn't have the peacekeeping operation in place, the money would not be reinvested in the root causes. In fact, if you look at sometimes the data on aid being brought into many of the African countries, that same aid is being used to revamp military equipment. So governments sometimes opt to use that money to then use it for military purposes, negative peace as we call it, but they don't really address the root cause of the conflict. So in that sense, I would say that we have to look at the facts and research again to say and determine when did the peacekeeping operation go wrong. The Africans actually have pushed the agenda quite far. Africa has always said at some point, African solutions to African problems. AMISOM is a very good example.
Yes, correct.
It's not the first. There have been other operations. AMIB in Burundi, the African mission to Burundi was something like this. But AMISOM is a clear example on where the Africans want to take it. And
in Sudan, we have hybrid forces in UNAMI.
You have hybrid forces here. In Mali, you had also AFISMA before it became MINUSMA. But the UN is slowly retreating and recognizing that regional security arrangements, such as the African Union, are better positioned to answer to the grievances and the conflict root causes on the ground. And Africans have taken that forward. And if you actually look at the African peace and security architecture, and you compare it to other organizations in the world, is the much progressed environment in terms of policies and procedures.
That's good. I would like just to make use of time to talk about some models and example about conflict resolution, mediation process. Why do they succeed? Why do they fail? Can we talk about, we know that you are involved as an expert and advisor to Yemen conflict and Syria, and would like to talk about Sudan as well. You were involved before. But maybe let us talk about Yemen right now. How do you define the conflict in Yemen? Is it struggle for power? Is it ethnic kind of conflict? UN mediation is right now, getting momentum after the negotiation going on in Norway. Is it an external factor intervention, as some of the Gulf countries said that is an extension of Iranian influence, or it is a mix of all these factors together?
You're right. It's more of the latter. It's a big mix. Yemen has always had conflicts. The south
throughout the history.
Throughout the history, the southern part, the northern part always vied for territory and for power, and these conflicts have existed throughout the history. So it's nothing really new. But what is new, and what you just mentioned to emphasize that, is the implication of external forces that use certain conflict zones as a power struggle to position themselves. And in this context, then you have two different scenarios taking place. The conflicts on the ground that have always existed, but they are exacerbated by powers, outside powers that also vie for regional influence. So in Yemen, that's the case. With the UN trying to have a seat at the table and to bring the parties together, the UN will have to carefully navigate its role. How can it build up the confidence between the parties? It will also then require some of the coalition forces, or maybe even Iranian-backed Houthis, to come to the table and say, what are our priorities? How do we want to move forward? So you have these long-lasting conflicts, these intractable conflicts that have always been there. But now even the internal parties realize that they can try to exploit their agenda as much as they possibly can by linking themselves to an outside client. This kind of dynamic is not really new. You could see it also in Sudan, especially in the Darfur conflict, when due to fragmentation of different parties in the conflict areas, different factions try to align themselves with outside interests.
Correct.
So that means that their readiness to negotiate is not really there. They advance a little bit, but they don't have a will to settle.
Correct.
Syria is the same. Syria is the same debate. You can say,
but before you go to
yeah.
Syria, I mean, do you think that for some players, the cost for peace is more expensive than the keep war going on?
Absolutely. Peace is very expensive. So they want to ask themselves, the benefit of peace and the cost of peace versus the benefit of war and the cost of war, or vice versa. So they do these calculations. If you're a big power, and in the current maelstrom of geopolitical rearrangement, you're going to try to position yourself to such an extent that you can still project power. So you will use little conflicts that were maybe for some time like a bush on fire, but you will go in there and you will fuel it because you can divert attention and you can maximize your outputs there. It's for you, maybe for a country like the US, not so much of a cost factor to get involved in Yemen, but it's a large projection of power if the US becomes involved, because the US can still say, we call the shots on what's happening here. Right? So they also go for these areas where they can calculate the costs. They know that Yemen could be a better cost for them to get involved than Syria. Now that the US, for example, says they will move out of Syria, doesn't mean that the US will stop operations in Syria. The US has still forces in Afghanistan and in Iraq, right?
Well,
so in that sense, powers always try to maximize their power. That is basic essentialism and realism. States always vie for power, and states will always go to extra length to deploy their power and to increase their power. Especially nowadays, where you have more state actors coming up and also saying we also have a right to sit at the table.
I would like to discuss other dimension regarding why peace agreement failed sometime after long negotiation for political or for other reason. I give you two examples. One, the long negotiated deal between US and Iran. The next administration said that we are not abide by this. It was negotiated between two states. So this is a context that, you know, the unwillingness of one state, you know, cannot preserve and keep and honor the peace agreement. This one. For example, between Eritrea and Ethiopia, this is another example. It was a territorial dispute, definitely, but they couldn't maintain peace for a long time until it erupted again. How can we analyze this in this context, that why peace agreement sometimes fail?
There are many debates on the reasons why peace agreements fail. In many situations, it goes back to, if there's no peace to keep, then there's no reason to have a peace agreement. If you know as a power that you're not so much interested in the peace, but you're interested in your own power, then the peace agreement is just formality, and you can revoke it. But let's say if you have the same people that want to come together. Think about Germany, the wall, and the wall came down. It's because you had one people.
Yes.
And they wanted to come together. It's very similar to Ethiopia, Eritrea. It's one people. They want to come back together. You will see that any peace process that is driven by local realities, by local actors, by local demands for peace, usually tend to last longer than those who are imposed by outside powers that only basically move forward in their strategies based on political considerations. And that is also very, very clear in the field. And it's sometimes where we then speak about that the international community has a short attention span.
Yes.
It moves to here, tries to maximize the exploitation of grievances and maybe other activities, and then moves on to the next. Interesting enough, when it moves on, then the local actors are able to actually resolve the issues on their own. And that's what mediation is all about, to be at the end, coming back to the book. It looks at, as a mediator, you try to assist parties in resolving their conflicts. But once you make it your own conflict, once you become part of the conflict, then you also determine the outcome. But you take it away from the parties. So we have this in the Iran deal, but we also have this, for example, in Syria, where the Russians became part of the Syrian conflict.
Correct.
Which then takes the Syrians, in terms of the participation, takes a bit away from them, because the Russians now have a say.
That's correct.
So the question is, how long will the Syrian people then live with that type of involvement in that sense? Imagine you have a house. You want to keep your house in order. And all of a sudden you have maybe another cousin or an uncle coming in who claims that he can help you. Now the uncle will then claim the specific type of power and territory to be able to access the fridge, to be able to access your water. How do you deal with that? So we have the same kind of situation. Whereas if you were in your family, you will be able to resolve your problems. But if you have outsiders coming in, you may have an issue.
Now, I would like to bring the discussion to Sudan. You were participant and expert and advisor during the CPA and Darfur and all that. They have different complexities. But the Sudanese elite, politician observer, they feel very bitter that the model to settle South Sudan, questioned before, was the only example in Africa that the deal that put on the table for the negotiators as an option for separation. And unfortunately, it ended up for separation. This is the only model in Africa that a peace deal ended up for separation. And it was a failed experience and bitter story for the Sudanese elite. How can you respond to that claim that it is the only model that leads to separation rather than to keep the unity of the country?
Yeah, it's a very good question you ask, because if you come from the UN, for example, within the Charter of the UN, the unity of the state is sacrosanct. And you will hardly find then mediators that openly push and go and say, yes, go for separation. So I'm trying to say that there were other powers involved that also furthered the narrative of separation. At the same time, and you have this in other countries, it's not just something that is for Sudan to consider. But, you have discussion about the Basque country in Spain for 30 years, East Timor.
East Timor.
Right? So secessionist movement and independence movement are always there. So you hear the concerns of the elites and of the priorities, and you can provide good claims that maybe a unitary state with some kind of autonomy resolution would have been a better deal moving forward. But again, the question is, what do the parties want? If one party really wants to separate, are you going to stop them? That's something that, as an outsider, you can't really answer, because as much as you maybe know from the dynamics on the ground, as much as you are involved with the parties, still they are the ones who are in charge of their mediation outcome. It's similar to a family. Imagine you have a husband and wife and they want to separate, they want to divorce. If there's no foundation in the relationship, and that foundation no longer exist, why do you want to keep an artificial composite together? For what benefit? And the question would rather be, okay, if we don't find an agreement, we rather separate, and we can maybe remain good friends and see how we do that. But we take care of different needs.
But Dr. Bاسكال, if the separation will be a good outcome to keep peace and stability, is a good outcome. But to have a separation and continuation of war, that means separation couldn't address the root causes of the conflict, because war erupted again.
That's true.
This is the question.
And it means the question is, how much were the parties clear about their scenarios, about their choices?
Correct.
And that's the question. Did they do enough conflict analysis? Did they really think it through? You may be emotional and say, I want to separate. I want to get out of here. I've been marginalized, not appreciated,
correct.
Traumatized, frustrated, and I've made claims and nothing has happened. I want to separate. So in that emotional state, because you have anger, fear, and hate, you want to also...
Social emotional.
So it's very difficult to then sit down with the parties and say, but take a look at the objective side of the story. And no party does that. No party wants to do that.
Let us move to Darfur. You were there as well. I would like to quote Alex Diwal, one of his books. He said that, Darfur conflict or Darfur settlement failed because there was no enough compensation for the warlords, leaders of the armed group there. What is your perspective about Darfur and the modalities prolong the war till now, and the, what do we call it, the multi-factors that keep dividing between each other along ethnic line?
That is an ongoing challenge in mediation. In mediation, one of your most important tasks, apart from saving lives, is to extract concessions from the parties. But you see, parties will only give a concession if they get an incentive or reward to do so.
Correct.
If they don't get it from you as a mediator, they will go someplace else. So in Darfur, and these conflicts did not happen overnight. They also have been happening for some time.
Correct.
So there's something
tribal clashes here there.
That's right. So there is something that happened at the tribal level that at some point they could not deal any longer with themselves. So then some just maybe decided to go to another patron, ask them for help. But maybe the patron did not have really genuine motives in play. So it plays its own power game to position itself, right? So then you have a lack of trust in the system. That's why parties do not trust each other. That's why you have a fragmentation of parties, because we may have a coalition today, but all of a sudden I see something happening that in my perception tells me that you may be on the other side, or it's just about perceptions. Then I will split from you. And that's what we've seen in the Darfur context, that many parties split over time and claim that they have different constituencies to serve. As a mediator, it's very, very difficult in that space to operate. If you have parties that are fragmented, no leadership to go to, and I agree with Alex Tawal's point, is that you're not able to compensate the different concessions that have been made, it's going to be very hard for you to move forward in that traction. So here you have not just a prolonged, intractable conflict, but also your conflict resolution has to be long-term. And I think we are seeing right now, we're going back to Darfur. Maybe the Doha agreement will be revived. We don't know. But it seems pretty clear to many stakeholders that there's something there we need to work on and work for, especially looking at the threat of Libya that has also interregional elements. So I think we're going to go back to understanding the role of the parties, how we can incentivize them, how we can bring them to a political fold altogether. In their mediators always try to build coalitions. You know, you have maybe 23 parties that claim political clouds. The mediators try to bring them in alliances. And that working of alliances is very difficult. Because, you know, you would have to say to party A, can you imagine to be in alliance with party B? They may have different needs, but for the sake of a negotiation strategy, you may have to bring them together. And I think that's what we have to look into right now.
My final question, because of the time, that the theoretical one, that UN approach and international community modalities for peacemaking is always preventing the African traditional ways and means for conflict resolution. In Africa, people on tribal level always appreciate forgiveness, they appreciate reconciliation, they appreciate transitional justice and all that. While the international community and UN in particular try to impose more and more fighting impunity, accountability, war crimes and all that. There is always a conflict in Africa regarding that. From a conflict resolution point of view, are they reconcilable together, or just we have to traditional African way or UN international community way?
I believe that they're reconcilable. I believe you can bring them together. And you have many, many people coming from either the international community, the community, that do sit down with local stakeholders and say, how can we do better? And you can see that the narrative has changed into saying, we can assist you, we can help you. And local stakeholders know that they don't have the capacity, the money, the human resources, the human capacity to do so. In many African countries, what you have is a brain drain, people going away from the African nations. So that means, you know, even if you try to resolve a structural issue in a country, you don't have the capacity, you don't have the people. So local stakeholders know these realities too. So what's happening, you see that there is emerging that's taking place, but maybe we have to do a little bit more. A very famous researcher, Séverine Autesserre, she also teaches at Columbia University, Barnard College, has worked a lot on the conflict in the DRC in the Congo. And she always mentioned that peace building for a long time has been a top-down approach, not taking into account the bottom-up approaches. But you know, it's not so easy to also say that we only can look at bottom-up approaches. You have some societies, whether in Africa or in Latin America or other societies, that always try to vie for power and fight for territory.
That's true.
So if you then say and claim that we can only listen to bottom-up approaches, that means you're also forgetting that there is a reality of local conflicts that have been carried out for many, many years and centuries.
I have a final question because we have 30 seconds left. Are you optimistic about the future of conflict resolution in Africa?
Yes, I am. African solutions for African problems, and I think the Africans have understood that, and they're taking the structures, the mechanisms, and the process in charge to move us there.
Dr. Bاسكال, thank you very much for your time. I think we had a real pleasure
Thank you for having
discussing
me.
all this with your knowledge, expertise, and also you are involving in different conflicts in the world, giving, advising, and also participating in conflict resolution. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
أعزائي المشاهدين، لكم الشكر والتقدير وأنتم تشاهدون وتستمعون لهذا الشرح المفصل والمطول، ربما يكون مرهقا لتعقيداته الخاصة بأساليب وتكتيكات التفاوض، لكن هذا الكتاب الذي تعرضنا له وطوفنا حول مضامينه يمثل أداة هامة لمعرفة قضايا النزاعات وكيفية فضها وتسويتها في العالم. سنلاحظ أو نتوقع أن تكون هناك ترجمة لهذا الكتاب إلى اللغة العربية، ولكن أيضا بخبرته الممتدة الدكتور جوزيف باسكال أمدنا بخبرته حول قضايا النزاعات في العالم وحول بعض الظلال حول قضايا الأزمات السودانية. لكم الشكر والتقدير على حسن المتابعة والمشاهدة. لكم الشكر والتقدير مرة أخرى. تقبلوا تحيات خالد موسى، تحيات الفريق العامل، وإلى اللقاء في حلقة أخرى. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. شكرا جزيلا. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
الشروق، شمس السودان التي لا تغيب.
الأكبر فينا منه؟
لا أنت لا